I have prepared a paper for this morning, studying Indian culture in the field, a comparative perspective on T.N. Madan, Dumont and Yogendra Singh. I think since most of you are teachers yourselves, you know very well that there have been three fieldwork traditions in Indian sociology. And there are also three fieldwork traditions in global sociology. And today I will try to compare and contrast the six fieldwork traditions in sociology. The global fieldwork traditions in global sociology from European and American perspectives are the following three. The German-American fieldwork tradition, which is known as Bastian Boas tradition, and the key figures are Herder, Bastian, Charles Sanders Peirce, Franz Boas, A.L. Kroeber, Hershkovitz, then David Snyder, Milton Singer, Clifford Geertz, to name the most important figures in Bastian Boas tradition of fieldwork in global sociology. The second tradition is primarily the French tradition of doing fieldwork, which was primarily institutionalized by people associated with Emile Durkheim and his journal Année Sociologique. The dominant name in this fieldwork tradition include not only the French exponents, but also their representatives elsewhere. The person who canonized fieldwork tradition in France is the nephew of Emile Durkheim, Marcel Mauss, and Henry Hubert. Both Henry Hubert and Marcel Mauss were great field workers, and both were also, besides being social anthropologists or sociologists, Indologists. Thomas Trautmann has written a very important article about Marcel Mauss as Indologist, And you must have read the celebrated work The Gift by Marcel Mauss. It had some section on India. The major work of Marcel Mauss was with Henry Hubert, and together, on the basis of fieldwork, they published a book on sacrifice. It is an attempt to study both the book view and the field view of Indian culture by modifying the cardinal rules of Indology. The rules of Indology was canonized around 1784 by Sir William Jones and his associates in the Asiatic Society of Bengal, as well as by the German-born British Indologist Max Muller. Both of them tried to use so-called sacred books of the East as data to theorize about India. Since it started in the last quarter of 18th century, the charge of Oriental bias, which Edward Said, Ziauddin Sardar, Talal Asad, Dipesh Chakravarti, Ashish Nandi, T.N. Madan, and Brian Turner have leveled is not applicable in the fieldwork tradition within sociology and Indology initiated by Henry Hubert and Marcel Mauss. The next field worker in this tradition is Claude Lévi-Strauss, who never visited India, but he innovated in the French tradition of fieldwork by considering data from Latin America. As you know, in the generation of Emile Durkheim, Karl Marx, and Max Weber, they did not have authentic data about Latin America as well as much of Asia. They primarily relied on European data with the African data and Australian data. Therefore, Marcel Mauss is regarded in the French tradition the real founder of field work. which was extended and made sophisticated by Claude Lévi-Strauss, Roland Barthes, and Louis Dumont. The third tradition of fieldwork was canonized by two British social anthropologists, Bronislaw Malinowski and A.R. Radcliffe Brown. And today, we are primarily dealing in the first section with the British tradition in the writings of their disciples. Bronislaw Malinowski had a student from India, D.N. Majumdar, who after completing his PhD joined Lucknow University as a colleague of Radha Kamal Mukherjee, D.P. Mukherjee, Baljit Singh, and A.K. Saran. Now, A.R. Radcliffe Brown also had a direct student from India, M.N. Srinivas, who had the distinction of getting two PhD on the same data, one at Bombay University under G.S. Ghurye and the other under A.R. Radcliffe Brown. Both works are published. The first work is not much discussed by the historians of Indian sociology, which was under G.S. Ghurye. But the second book on the same data, which was published under the supervision of A.R. Radcliffe Brown and E.E. Evans Pritchard, is a celebrated book, Religion and Society among the Kurks of South India. In the same way, T.N. Madan was a direct student of D.N. Majumdar at Lucknow, and his early writing, namely Family and Kinship, a study of the Pandits of rural Kashmir, he followed the fieldwork tradition established by Bronislaw Malinowski and extended and refined by D.N. Majumdar. But the published book had one more influence, that of J.A. Barnes of Australian National University. Now, Family and Kinship, a study of the Pandits of rural Kashmir, it had 3 incarnations. First, it was published in 1964. The second edition came in 1989. and the third edition came in 2010. In the first two editions, the title is the same, Family and Kinship, a study of the Pandits of rural Kashmir. But in the third incarnation, it is known as the Hindu Householder. This is T.N. Madan omnibus. It includes not only family and kinship, but also his second major work, Non-Renunciation, Themes and Interpretations of Hindu Culture. And in this book, the most important theme is his synthesis of Indology and ontology with sociology. But it also had some other celebrated essays published in Contributions to Indian Sociology. Primarily, by 1994, we have third incarnation of T.N. Madan as a field worker of Indian culture. In the first incarnation in 1960s, he was influenced by Bronisila Malinowski, D.N. Majumdar. In early 70s, he was also influenced by J.A. Barnes. But by 1975, we have a different T.N. Madan, who is influenced by Louis Dumont. Louis Dumont, with David Pocock, started the journal Contributions to Indian Sociology in 1950s. And his 1966 book, Homo Hierarchicus, in French, was translated into English in 1970. And by 1975, many Indian sociologists were influenced by Louis Dumont. Now, M.N. Srinivas, on the other hand, established a different type of fieldwork tradition, but in case we have three important departure points in T.N. Madan, we have also three departures in the writings of M.N. Srinivas, the great field worker associated with Delhi School of Economics. Now, I have already said that he had two PhD, one under G.S. Ghurye and the other on the same data, same society of Kurks under A.R. Radcliffe Brown and E.E. Evans Pritchard. But very soon, he was influenced by Milton Singh. It was mutual inspiration. Milton Singh had been associated with the Western bourgeois tradition of American cultural anthropology, but he was more influenced by Charles Sanders Peirce, like his contemporary Clifford Geertz, whose The Interpretation of Cultures is a celebrated work. But there was a third development in American fieldwork tradition, which was partly influenced by Garfinkel and partly influenced by Bastian Boas tradition. And this influence on Srinivas is evident in his 1976 publication, The Remembered Village. Unlike his first major work, 1952, Religion and Society Among the Kurks of South India, where we find a structural functional method of A.R. Brown as a methodology, and unlike ontology and epistemology, ontology is theory of reality and epistemology is theory of knowledge. Methodology is a two-edged weapon. There is a method to construct theory and there is a method to collect data. Unfortunately, this difference or this duality of methodology is not sufficiently underlined and elucidated by writers and teachers on methods. But we have a third incarnation of M.N. Srinivas, which emerged in 1986 in his long sociological essay titled On Living in a Revolution. This was published in a book titled India 2000, The Next 15 Years. It was edited by J.R. Roach. Now, what we find in Srinivas and T.N. Madan is an important aspect of my presentation today, and I have titled it Fieldwork Traditions in Social Sciences, Sociology and Social Cultural Anthropology. And instead of just comparing, as A.R. Radcliffe Brown used to say, I am also interested, besides comparison, in a structural perspective of contrasts or binary oppositions. Therefore, we have three binary oppositions. One is underlined in the title, the other is absent. Therefore, we have T.N. Madan, and he is contrasted with M.N. Srinivas. M.N. Srinivas is absent in the title. Then we have second contrast, Louis Dumont and Milton Singer. Louis Dumont is present, whereas Milton Singer is absent in this contrast. And the third is a contrast between Yogendra Singh, which is present in the title, and A.M. Shah, who is absent in the title. Now, the natural question is, why I am doing like this? Because I do feel that when you are doing empirical study of culture in India in particular, or anywhere else in general, you will have to bring in a very important figure, E. Evans Pritchard, who is not sufficiently represented in the writings on fieldwork traditions in global sociology. Now, you all know Bronislaw Malinowski, canonized participant observation. His book, Argonauts of the Western Pacific, as well as A.R. Radcliffe Brown's book, The Andaman Islanders, both were published in the same year, 1922. By then, all the three founding fathers of sociology were dead. Durkheim was dead, Marx was long dead, Weber was also dead. Therefore, we have to understand, if both field workers produced their work in the same year, why A.R. Radcliffe Brown is not hailed as a great field worker, whereas Bronislaw Malinowski is hailed as a great field worker? The reason is very simple. Participant observation of Bronislaw Malinowski includes the method of Verstehen, which is also rooted in neo-Kantian distinction between noumena and phenomena. Noumena is reality in itself, and phenomena is reality as it appears through our concepts, theories, hypothesis, interpretation. The question of phenomena and noumena in the field was terribly important for Bronislaw Malinowski. But in comparison, A.R. Radcliffe Brown did a very commonsensical field work. Therefore, if you read Andaman Islanders, you will realize that In contrast to Malinowski's Argonauts of the Western Pacific or his A Diary in the strict sense of the term. The second book, A Diary in the strict sense of the term, had been my favorite book from 1970s. Unlike my classmates, my introduction to fieldwork was not through Argonauts of Western Pacific, the 1922 ethnographic classic by Bronislaw Malinowski. In 1979-1983, my favorite book was A Diary in the strict sense of the term by Malinowski. This book was translated and published in 1967. Malinowski had died on 16th May 1942. He was Polish-born British anthropologist who was born on 7th April 1884 in Austria-Hungary. Both books were written about Proviant people who live on the island of New Guinea. New Guinea is the second largest island in the southern hemisphere, located in Melanesia in the South Pacific Ocean near Australia. When I was reading an introduction to social anthropology by D.N. Majumdar and his student T.N. Madan, published in 1956, I was informed that D.N. Majumdar was a direct student of Bronislaw Malinowski, the way M.N. Srinivas was a direct student of A.R. Radcliffe Brown. A.R. Radcliffe Brown's Andaman Islanders was also published in 1922. A.R. Radcliffe Brown had died on 24th October 1955, 1 year before Majumdar and Madan's book was published. Although Radcliffe Brown's book was about an Indian island, and he was the teacher and guide of M.N. Srinivas, the founder of Delhi School of Economics, and perhaps the most important champion of fieldwork in Indian sociology. But somehow I did not like Andaman Islanders. In contrast, Malinowski's diary made a deep impact on my young mind in the late 70s and early 80s, and it was my fieldwork Bible during early 1990s. In 1990, Makim Marriott had published India Through Hindu Categories. It was an edited volume which was published in 1989 as a special volume of contributions to Indian sociology. Marriott had written an article constructing an Indian ethno-sociology through Hindu categories. In 1988, Conversations of Claude Lévi-Strauss with Didier Urban was published in the French language. In 1990, Ronald B. Inden published Imagining India he had been consistently working since 1975 on different elements of Indian culture by utilizing David M. Snyder. By 1995, the fieldwork-based ethnographies went through some sort of metamorphosis. Now, this is my introduction to my lecture today, and those who are not familiar with American Kinship, a cultural account, 1968 by David M. Snyder, should be reminded that the title of the book is American Kinship, and it is widely recognized that there is no kinship in American society. Then the question is, why this book was written at all? And here comes E. Evans Pritchard. As you know, Evans Pritchard was a direct student of Bronislaw Malinowski, and he was a close collaborator of A.R. Radcliffe Brown. But he was not a student of A.R. Radcliffe Brown, and both had two different types of notions, not only about religion, but also about culture, also about fieldwork. Now, what is significant in the two books E. Evans Pritchard wrote about the Nuer, the African tribe? For the first time in the history of fieldwork, E. Evans Pritchard underlined a field strategy. When you read Malinowski, particularly his diary, which is based on his field notes, he was not using recorder, he was writing his diary by longhand. That Malinowski gives a lot of importance on selecting the key informant, although the whole community, the whole society is being observed as a participant observer. But he institutionalized the concept of key informant. And then in his diary, he discusses how to establish a very emotional bond. He uses the term rapport. How to establish rapport with the key informant in such a way that although the anthropologist is born and brought up in the other culture, this key informant, will play the role of a midwife. You know who is a midwife? The lady who helps a pregnant woman to give birth to the child. Therefore, in case you are doing a very honest field work anywhere in the world, you have to establish this relationship, this rapport, this bond between you and the key informant who is going to introduce you to his community as insider, although you are from a different racial background, although you are born and brought up elsewhere. This key informant is your friend, philosopher, and guide in the field. Now, here Bronislaw Malinowski integrated the Verstehen approach, which was primarily coined by Herder within the German tradition, and Bastian Boas were also influenced by Herder. But Max Weber made it a popular term, Verstehen. What is Verstehen? It is understanding the data. It is understanding the field from inside, like a worm. There is a bird eye view and there is a worm eye view. The worm is part of your body. It is like virus, it is like amoeba. It is like different types of insects, virus within your body, and when you give a stool test, such insects and viruses are detected. It may be also detected in your urine sample and sometimes also in your blood sample. You know that anthropology does not restrict itself only to the cultural dimension and the social dimension, but it also studies the physical dimension. Therefore, there is a lot of biology in a structural functional tradition of fieldwork, and in Malinowski particularly, this physical dimension and psychological dimension is very, very pronounced, although he claims to be a Durkheimian, and you know the view of Emile Durkheim, that sociology and psychology, they are so far that they cannot be synthesized in any meaningful way. Now, in this innovative tradition of fieldwork, where Verstehen, or understanding the inner world, the backstage of Goffman, the inner secrets of the household are revealed to the field worker, because the key informant facilitates the transition of the anthropologist as a Kaji member of the group. Now, in such milieu, E. Evans Pritchard was doing his fieldwork among the Nuer, and a question arose in his mind. What is the best way to study a state? He said, observation will give you only surface structural view. But the deep structure of a state, or the deep state, cannot be understood by participant observation. Then how it can be studied in the field? Evans Pritchard proposed that in case you are interested in a state, go in a stateless society. And then you will study how a society or community manages to function as a normal solidarity, as a normal society, as a normal community, as a normal association, as a normal institution, without that apparent organ called the state. In the same way, in case you are interested in gender equality and you are reading a course on gender and society, and you know that men are privileged in the modern world, Evans Pritchard said that in traditional society, primarily in the tribal societies, women have a far more superior status and role and power. Whereas in modernity, in the name of equality, women are doubly exploited. First, they will be encouraged to work in the office, in the factory, but their household work will not be shared by the husband and the wife in most cases. Therefore, in case both husband and wife, they are working, the woman worker will be doubly exploited. She will be exploited in the office and she will be also exploited in the home. Because modern culture, according to Evans Pritchard, is much more stratified, differentiated, and it works like a fragmented world. Since there is no holistic approach to field work, sociological field workers who usually use the survey method and quantitative techniques, they reify the data. What is reification? Overgeneralization or undergeneralization. Evans Pritchard cautions that this reification can be nullified in case we do both comparison and contrast. Therefore, he is saying you study the state in United Kingdom and you study the state in the stateless society of the Nuer. It was this insight of contrast which influenced David M. Snyder to study American kinship, although he knew there is only family or there is only marriage or there is living together or there are single parents. There is no kinship network, there is no kinship system, but he decided to do a field work of American kinship by following the method provided by Charles Sanders Peirce. The method is called semiotics. Now, Louis Dumont, Lévi-Strauss, and Rodney Needham, and early Roland Barthes, when they were doing structural anthropology, what method they were using? They were using the method of semiology, whereas their American counterparts, David M. Snyder, Clifford Geertz, and Milton Singer, they were doing field work on the basis of semiotics. Therefore, my second section is devoted to the method and technique of semiology and semiotics. Here we find two very interesting departures. One is from kinship to culture. And here we find The field works of David Snyder and Louis Dumont, Victor Turner, Mary Douglas, and then we have the other transition, and that is from social structure to cultural symbols. Here we have Pierre Bourdieu, Clifford Geertz, and as I said, Milton Singer, also Mackie Marriott, and we should not miss the most important interpreter of semiotics in Europe, the Italian sociologist, social anthropologist Umberto Eco. Therefore, we have three fieldwork traditions in global sociology: Bastien Boas tradition, and the French tradition of Henry Hubert and Marcel Mauss, and Bronislaw Malinowski and A.R. Radcliffe Brown. And then we have two transitions from kinship to culture and from social structure to cultural symbols. I have already contrasted T.N. Madan and M.N. Srinivas. Now, let us compare and contrast our friend Louis Dumont and Milton Singer. Both are using semiology and semiotics. Louis Dumont is a representative who is using the method and technique of semiology in the field, and Milton Singer is trying to understand Indian society by using the method and technique of semiotics. Let us see how they are proceeding. Louis Dumont is using semiology since 1975, when he wrote his first article for a Sociology of India in Contributions to Indian Sociology, edited by Dumont and Pocock, and it is being published from Paris. Then in 1957, Louis Dumont is studying hierarchy and marriage alliance in South Indian kinship. This is a monograph. Then he is writing another article in 1960, Renunciation in Indian Religions, in Contributions to Indian Sociology. Then in 1966, he wrote Homo Hierarchicus, the caste system and its implication. It was revised completely in the second edition in 1980, but the Oxford University Press brought it in India in 1988. Title is the same, but this is complete revision of the first edition. Then in 1970, he is writing Religion, Politics and History in India. And then in 1977, he is writing From Mandeville to Marx, The Genesis and Triumph of Economic Ideology. And then in 1986, he is writing Essays on Individualism, Modern Ideology in Anthropological Perspective. Now, I made the detailed note of the significant works of Louis Dumont rooted in semiology to make a contrast what type of themes and sub-themes are being studied by Indian sociologists or sociologists who are working on the Indian data. Let us see. In 1964, Madan is studying family and kinship. But he is not interested in religion, politics, and history of the cultures of Pandits of Kashmir when he was working within the framework of functionalism of Malinowski and D.N. Majumdar. Now, one of the charges against structural functionalism and structural functionalism of A.R.L.P. Brown as well as Talcott Parsons and Robert Merton, and functionalism of Malinowski and D.N. Majumdar has been that they take a very ahistorical view of society and culture, and they present some sort of a static view of the society. The changing dimension is not taken into account in a very systematic way. But semiologists like Louis Dumont and of course the master Claude Lévi-Strauss and Roland Barthes, they take different types of themes, both static and dynamic, in different type of societies they decided to study. Now the question which is striking to me is how to study Indian culture in particular, and here I must discuss two other schools of fieldwork. One tradition of fieldwork is represented by D.N. Majumdar in Lucknow University. But please remember, there is another field worker in Lucknow Department of Sociology, and he is Radha Kamal Mukherjee. D.P. Mukherjee was not a great field worker. He was primarily armchair sociologist, very good in theorizing, but he primarily worked with secondary data. And then there was A.K. Saran, who was a field worker, but he did not practice sociology of Europe. Rather, he was more influenced by B.K. Sarkar of Calcutta University, who is regarded as the founding father of Indian sociology. Now, what is significant of B.K. Sarkar and his brand of fieldwork? Now, B.K. Sarkar wrote his first book much before G.S. Ghurye was even a student of sociology under Patrick Gates. What he did, he was a product of Swadeshi movement in Bengal, which began in 1906. And under the influence of Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, he articulated the need to develop an independent sociology like the one Auguste Comte had developed in France. Now, as you know, in India, three important East India companies were active: the East India Company of England, or United Kingdom or Britain, and East India Company of France, East India Company of Portugal, and East India Company of Netherlands, the Dutch, the Holland people. But there was no East India Company from Germany, number one. And number two, the French East India Company was long defeated by the British and the Portuguese. They were also defeated by the king of Mysore. Now, what I wanted to share with you is the insight I got in reading the fieldwork tradition of Bengal. They were not influenced by Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. Although they started working around 1906, and sociology was taught in Calcutta University from 1908. But they were not teaching Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. Whom they were teaching? They were teaching Auguste Comte and his positivism. But they were not trying to copy Auguste Comte's content. They borrowed the theory, the method, and the technique. But they did not copy the substantive theory, which was known as the law of three stages. Rather, they tried to develop their own theory on the basis of field work. Now, what type of field work B.K. Sarkar was doing? It was not participant observation. Why? Because he was not studying the other culture. He was studying his own society of Bengal and India. That was the sociological tradition of Auguste Comte, positivism. Therefore, the question of learning a new language was neither needed nor desirable. B.K. Sarkar said that in case we are studying the other culture, half of the time at least will go in learning the language, that is the communicative language, as well as learning the language of culture, the special language of culture, which is primarily reflected in literature, cinema, fine arts, costumes, house architecture, temple architecture, folkways and mores, norms and values, not from book view, but from field view. Let us study norms and values in the field. Let us study architecture in the field. Let us study town planning in the field. This was first thing which was emphasized in the Bengali school of field work. And the person who conducted extensive field work was a classmate of G.S. Ghurye, who was working under Radha Kamal Mukherjee, then a senior student of B.K. Sarkar. His name was K.C. Chattopadhyay. B.K. Sarkar primarily played the same role in Calcutta School of Fieldwork, which Durkheim played in the French tradition, or Bastian and Herder played in the Bois tradition of fieldwork. But the real field worker who can be compared with friend Bois in Calcutta school were two people. One was the classmate of G.S. Ghurye, K.C. Chattopadhyay. Both were students of W.H.R. Rivers, and Nirmal Kumar Bose, who was the private secretary of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, the type of field work which Nirmal Kumar Bose and K.C. Chattopadhyay initiated at Kolkata was refined by Surojit Sinha on the one hand and Andre Bete on the other. Many people think that since Andre Bete conducted his PhD fieldwork under the supervision of Srinivas, and therefore he must be influenced by the fieldwork strategy of Srinivas, are not fully correct. The influence of N.K. Bose on Andre Bete is much more decisive than the influence of M.N. Srinivas, and it is reflected in the type of writings Andre Bete was interested in. Of course, he studied caste, class and power in a Tanjore village, but he also studied the agrarian structure. He also studied the role of universities and institutions in a democracy. This legacy is coming from N.K. Bose and the Bengal tradition, although Andre Bete never articulated it in this way, but since he was my tutor in all the 4 semesters of MA, I know how Andre Bete, the field worker, conducted his field work. Now, the second fieldwork tradition in India was canonized by G.S. Ghurye. Many people think that caste and race in India is his most popular work. They are right. But this was his PhD thesis. He wrote this book as a student of W.H.R. Rivers, and the initial training was by Sir Patrick Gates. But the original Ghurye comes in when he is writing about cities and civilization. G.S. Ghurye, unlike his student M.N. Srinivas, does not equate India with village, joint family and caste system. Ghurye conceptualized India not as an amalgamation of caste and race in India. He had a civilizational perspective and a historical method which was articulated by his diverse range of students. See what type of students Ghurye produced. He produced M.N. Srinivas, but he also produced M.S.A. Rao. He produced A.R. Desai, but he also produced K.M. Kapadia. If he produced Dhirendra Narayan, he also influenced Iravati Karve. Therefore, you will not find a banyan tree like G.S. Ghurye who patronized and supervised different types of field works. He was one teacher whose students were using different types of methods and techniques to study the diversity of Indian civilization. Those who are interested in the contribution of G.S. Ghurye, you can consult Professor Pramanik's book on G.S. Ghurye or A.R. Momin's articles on G.S. Ghurye. They underline what type of banyan tree Ghurye represented and what type of fieldwork they did. Now, we have four important departments of sociology in India who are conducting fieldwork to study culture. One, as I said, the oldest, that is Calcutta School of Fieldwork. Second, G.S. Ghurye and the Bombay School of Fieldwork. Third, Radha Kamal Mukherjee, D.N. Majumdar, D.P. Mukherjee, Baljit Singh, A.K. Saran and T.N. Madan, T.K.N. Unithan, Indradev and Yogendra Singh. They are all associated with Lucknow School of Sociology and they did whatever fieldwork they did by following the methods and techniques which were refined at Lucknow School of Sociology. Then there is the fourth school, and that is Delhi School of Economics, Department of Sociology, which was, founded by two people. Definitely, M.N. Srinivas is given the credit of opening the Department of Sociology, and therefore he is regarded as the founder. But there is a historical fact which is not known widely, that before M.N. Srinivas, sociology was taught in economics department of Delhi School of Economics, and two teachers started teaching sociology in economics at Delhi School of Economics, and they were M.S.A. Rao as the reader and Andre Bete as the lecturer. There was no professor. When the first professor post was advertised, M.N. Srinivas was invited by the founding director, V.K.R. Rao, and he founded the department. Now, the type of field work which he promoted, M.N. Srinivas, equated India with village, equated India with joint family, equated India with the caste system, equated India with the tribal communities. On the other hand, in the same department, M.S. Rao devoted his energy on studying social movements, urban cultures. He devoted his energy in the study of sex instead of the caste. And therefore, you have two founding fathers in the Delhi School of Economics. One is M.N. Srinivas, who synthesized the Ghurye Radcliffe-Brown tradition. But there is another, of course, marginal tradition of fieldwork in Delhi School of Economics, which was initiated by M.S. Rao, and they did not equated India with caste, village or joint family. Rather, they emphasized the importance of sex, independent sex. They emphasized the importance of urban cultures, urban governance, urban structure, and those who emphasized social movements. Now, this tradition of M.S. Rao was marginal until M.N. Srinivas remained in the department. But once M.N. Srinivas left Delhi School of Economics for Bangalore, The influence of M.S. Rao started increasing, but unfortunately, he died very soon. As a result, we have A.M. Shah emerging as the patron saint of Delhi School of Economics after M.N. Srinivas. And therefore, in the third section, I have, contrasted Yogendra Singh with A.M. Shah. But before I come to Yogendra Singh, let me share with you what type of work Milton Singer was doing. Milton Singer's first major work was When a Great Tradition Modernizes in 1972. And in this work, he is influenced by the writings of M.N. Srinivas. But by 1984, he publishes Man's Glassy Essence. And this is the first systematic use of semiotics in the study of Indian culture. Then he comes in 1991 with Semiotics of Cities, Selves and Cultures, Explorations in Semiotic Anthropology. Now, what type of work Yogendra Singh is writing? His first major work was in 1973, Modernization of Indian Tradition. This book is, a synthesis of the insights of Indian tradition provided by D.P. Mukherjee on the one hand and the theory of modernization propounded by Talcott Parsons. Now, this is a book which is based on secondary sources of material. Yogendra Singh did not publish his field work, which he did for his PhD under Baljit Singh. Then in 1986, Yogendra Singh comes with Indian Sociology. In 1993, he is writing Social Change in India, Crisis and Resilience. In 2000, he is writing Culture Change in India, Identity and Globalization. And in 2004, he is writing Ideology and Theory in Indian Sociology. He died in 2020, that is last year. Therefore, in the writings of Yogendra Singh, we have influence of D.P. Mukherjee, primarily when he is discussing Indian tradition, influence of Talcott Parsons, when he is studying modernization, when he is studying social change in India, crisis and resilience. But in the book which he published in the year 2000, Culture Change in India, Identity and Globalization, he is influenced by Arjun Appadurai. Primarily his 1996 book, Modernity at Large, Cultural Dimensions of Globalization. Therefore, since time is very little, I will try to underline the significance of A.M. Shah. A.M. Shah wrote his first book, The Household Dimension of the Family in India. The household dimension of the family in India in 1973. Then he wrote The Family in India, Critical Essays in 1998. In 2002, he came up with Exploring India's Rural Past. And then he wrote in 2019, The Structure of Indian Society, Then and Now. And then he edited two books. One, M.N. Srinivas, The Man and His Works. And second, Social Structure and Social Change, an evaluation of the works of M.N. Srinivas. In case we compare and contrast Yogendra Singh with A.M. Shah, we find the following influence in the study of culture. In Yogendra Singh, we have D.P. Mukherjee. In A.M. Shah, we have G.S. Ghurye. Then we have Talbot Parsons in Yogendra Singh. In A.M. Shah, we have M.N. Srinivas, and to some extent also M.S.A. Rao. Then we have Arjun Appadurai in the case of Yogendra Singh. In the case of A.M. Shah, the man who influenced his later writing is Jack Goody. Now, what is the difference between A.M. Shah and his teacher M.N. Srinivas? Now, in Srinivas, we have G.S. Ghurye, A.R. Radcliffe Brown, and Milton Singer. In Shah, we have G.S. Ghurye, M.N. Srinivas, M.S.A. Rao, and Jack Goody. So far as the content is concerned, A.M. Shah is giving a lot of importance to history as well. Therefore, A.M. Shah is a person who represents historical sociology of Indian culture with D.P. Mukherjee and A.R. Desai, whereas Yogendra Singh represented a structural functionalism and to some extent Marxiology of D.P. Mukherjee. Now, what is the difference between Marxist theory and Marxiology? Now, A.R. Desai is a Marxist, D.D. Kosambi is a Marxist, but D.P. Mukherjee called himself Marxiologist. What is meant by Marxiology? D.P. Mukherjee is saying that I synthesize the method of dialectics and method of political economy which I borrow from Karl Marx, and I synthesize it with the Indological data of B.K. Sarkar and many other Indologists who are associated with Bengal School of Sociology and Indology. Here I end my lecture. I am not fully satisfied because much of my matter is still to be shared with you, but I invite questions and comments because time is running up.